wonderful friends, it's Evelyn here and welcome back to this, my very own little creative corner of the internet. Huge thanks to each and every single one of you for being here and supporting this little creativity journey of mine. This week, my friends, I'm continuing my little personal foray into Shirtwaist September, and this week I'm creating my very own shirt dress. I'm going to create a scout dress from Gertie's World on Patreon. So my friends, if you haven't done so already, please remember to hit that all important subscribe button for me. But without further ado, let's get to some sewing. You might have spotted this week's fabric in last week's video, my friends. This gorgeous blue spotty cotton poplin called Copenhagen is a Rose and Hubble fabric from my friends at Minerva. A nice day outside, I grabbed the sewing supplies and went into the garden to cut out my pieces, while Luna had a sunny snooze in the egg chair, of course. I'm only using the bodice pieces from the scout dress pattern today, making a simple gathered waist button front skirt for the bottom half of my shirt dress. So bodice pieces all cut out, it was time to cut the pieces for the skirt. This is done simply by cutting 2 rectangles across the entire width of my fabric, each rectangle being 27 inches wide, this measurement being how long I want my finished skirt to be, plus 2 seam allowances. All of those pieces cut out, let's get sewing. Starting with the darts on the front and back bodice pieces, I pinned and sewed before pressing those darts. Also stay stitching the necklines at the same time. Be sure not to skip pressing, my friends, especially if you're working with cotton like this, because it really can make a huge difference to your final project. The shoulder and side seams were next, and this dress really can come together satisfyingly quickly. Constructing the collar, the 2 collar pieces are placed right sides together, pinning and stitching all along the long edge and down the sides, before trimming those seam allowances to ensure that the edges of my collar can be turned out and pressed nicely, neatly and crisply. The lower edge is then basted closed to make it much easier to attach around our neckline. Feel free to clip to that stay stitching at the curviest part of the neckline, my friends, to make pinning and attaching that collar a breeze. The bodice facing is then constructed, pinning and stitching the back and front pieces together at the effective shoulder seam to create this strange looking piece. Which is then pinned all around the bodice, right sides together, sandwiching the collar in between. Take care here, friends, and sew carefully, ensuring that you pivot your stitching at the given 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Spend a bit of time clipping into those seams and grading those seam allowances, friends, so that your collar looks just right. Give it an understitch too, so that the lining layer rolls to the inside, but pay attention to the match points and notches here, friends, so that your understitching isn't on the wrong side and shows like mine did. Oops. Time for the sleeves, and I've changed the pattern pieces slightly here, friends, to make this pattern more accessible for me. The original style uses a really cute button cuff with a keyhole detail on the sleeve, but I can find buttons very fiddly, so I've simply cut the sleeve without the keyhole detail, sewing the cuffs into a ring rather than using a button closure. This will mean there's 2 less buttons to have to do up on this already button-laden shirt dress. Sewing a line of gathering stitches all along the edge of the sleeve, I'll simply gather the sleeve edge into the cuff. And for that cuff, I'm using the same pattern piece, but I'm simply folding it in half lengthways, wrong sides together, and basting the raw edge closed, ready to attach to my sleeve. And how cute do these little adapted sleeves look? Time to insert them into my bodice. Then sewing those side seams and a line of gathering stitches on the waistline of my skirt panels, one rectangle of which has now been cut in half to form the 2 fronts of what will become a button front skirt. And because I was getting just a little bit excited by the progress I had made, I pinned this creation to Betty to see how it was going. On to the next step. Looking at the pattern and the buttonhole placement on the bodice, I'm going to fold over my skirt fronts to create a facing of sorts, folding it to the inside of the garment by the same amount as the finished facings shows on the bodice, which was 1 3/8 inches, and pressing and pinning that cut-on facing in place. Now for the buttons, and I've got to indulge in another love of mine here, my friends, repurposing old garments. This time, one of my husband's poor old worn work shirts. I love reusing buttons like these, and the fabric, well, that will become underlining in future projects. Being slightly smaller than the suggested 5/8 of an inch buttons, I changed the button placement slightly, placing them 2 inches apart and spending a fair few hours and a couple or 2 hand stitching them all to the bodice and skirt of my dress. The bodice and skirt were then attached all along the waistline. Time for those buttonholes, beginning by marking them on the garment, firstly using pins and then tailor's chalk. At first, I gave the automatic buttonhole function on my Netchi machine a try, and although this particular one turned out great, it did fancy a chew of my fabric now and then on these practice runs, which brings me to today's top tip, friends. Do practice runs. Trust me, it has saved my projects and my sanity many a time. So I grabbed my trusty Brother RL417 machine and got to some 5-step buttonholes, 17 of them to be precise. And all that was left was to hem this shirt dress. It's reveal time. Well, my friends, I am absolutely in love with this shirt dress. I love the fabric, the pattern, the colour. It just all seemed to come together. And as for the scout dress that I used for the bodice of this pattern, you know how much I love Gertie and charm patterns, my friends, and this scout dress, well, I'm going to be making a million more of them. I really enjoyed Shirtwaist September, and I hope that you have too, my friends. You might also be spying a matching belt with this scout dress. it might just be next week's project. But until then, my friends, you take care, stay safe, see you next week. Bye!